In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green hills, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The townsfolk knew each other by name, shared stories over cups of coffee, and gathered together during moments of joy or sorrow. But today, the air felt heavier than usual. Today wasn't about laughter or celebration. It was about saying goodbye to someone who had touched countless lives. Sarah had been the heart of this community. She was the kind of person everyone loved, warm, generous, and always ready with a smile. Whether it was baking cookies for school fundraisers, volunteering at the local library, or simply lending an ear to a neighbor in need, Sarah made people feel seen and valued. Her sudden passing in a car accident left a void no one knew how to fill. It wasn't just her family who mourned her loss. The entire town seemed to grieve alongside them. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky itself understood the weight of the day. People began arriving early, parking their cars along the narrow roads leading up to the small white church where the service would take place. Inside, rows of wooden pews filled quickly with friends, relatives, co-workers, and acquaintances. Each face bore the same expression, a mixture of sadness and disbelief. How could someone so full of life be gone? At the front of the church sat Mark, Sarah's husband, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his grief. Beside him was Emily, their 16-year-old daughter, clutching a tissue tightly in her hand. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but she hadn't shed a single tear since waking up that morning. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her mind replaying memories of her mother like a movie on repeat. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the last conversation she'd had with her mom. They'd argued, something trivial about curfews and responsibilities, and now those unspoken apologies weighed heavily on her chest. If only she could turn back time, she thought bitterly. If only she'd hugged her mom one more time instead of storming off to her room. As the pastor began speaking, his voice calm and reassuring, Emily tried to focus on the words. He talked about Sarah's kindness, her unwavering optimism, and the way she lit up every room she entered. But none of it brought comfort. All Emily could think about was the casket resting at the front of the church, closed forever. Her mom was inside, yet it felt impossible to believe. Just days ago, Sarah had been laughing at the dinner table, teasing Emily about her messy room. Now, silence had taken her place. When the service ended, the congregation filed out silently, forming a line behind the hearse that would lead them to the cemetery. The drive was short but felt endless. Emily sat sandwiched between her father and her uncle, staring blankly out the window as they passed familiar landmarks, the park where she used to play as a child, the cafe where her mom often stopped for coffee, the school where Emily spent most of her days. Every sight reminded her of Sarah, making the ache in her chest grow sharper. At the cemetery, the scene was somber. Rows of headstones stretched out across the grassy hillside, marking the resting places of those who had come before. A tent had been set up to shield mourners from the drizzle that had begun to fall. Chairs were arranged in neat rows around the freshly dug grave, waiting patiently for the final farewell. Emily stood beside her father, feeling numb as the pastor recited prayers and read passages from the Bible. She barely registered the gentle patter of rain against the tent or the soft sniffles coming from those around her. Her thoughts kept drifting back to happier times, the lazy Sunday mornings spent watching cartoons with her mom, the summer vacations filled with laughter and adventure. Those memories felt like fragments of a dream now, slipping further away with each passing moment. Finally, it was time for the eulogies. Friends and family stepped forward to share their favorite stories about Sarah. One spoke of her knack for organizing events, another recalled her infectious laugh, and yet another praised her selflessness. Each story painted a vivid picture of the woman everyone adored, but none captured the private moments Emily cherished most. No one mentioned the late-night talks when Sarah would sit on the edge of Emily's bed, offering advice or just listening. No one described the way Sarah always knew exactly what to say to make everything better. When it came time for the final goodbyes, Emily hesitated. She didn't want to approach the casket, didn't want to face the reality of her mother's absence. But something inside her urged her forward, compelling her to move closer despite the pain. Slowly, she walked up to the shiny wooden box, her legs trembling beneath her. In her hands, she held a single white rose, its petals delicate and pure. Kneeling down, Emily placed the flower gently on top of the casket. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I love you, Mom. Please come back." Her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions, barely audible over the rustling of leaves in the wind. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine that her mom might hear her, that somehow, somewhere, Sarah could feel her love and answer her plea. But there was no response. Only silence greeted her words, stretching out endlessly until Emily finally forced herself to stand. Turning back toward her father, she felt a wave of loneliness crash over her. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into his arms and let him hold her together, even if just for a little while. Little. Did she know? The next few seconds would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone gathered there that day. As Emily stepped away from the casket, her legs felt like they were made of lead. The weight of her grief pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had said her final goodbye, or at least that's what she thought, but the ache inside her only grew sharper. Her mother was gone, and no amount of tears or whispered words could bring her back. Still, Emily clung to the faint hope that somehow, somewhere, Sarah might hear her. It was a desperate wish born out of love and loss, one that refused to fade even in the face of reality. The crowd around her began to shift as people prepared for the next part of the ceremony. Friends and family members exchanged quiet murmurs, some offering condolences to Mark while others simply stood silently, their heads bowed in respect. Emily felt disconnected from all of it, as if she were watching the scene unfold from far away. The world seemed muted, the colors duller, the sounds softer. Everything around her moved in slow motion, except for the storm raging inside her heart. When she finally reached her father, Emily didn't hesitate. Without a word, she wrapped her arms tightly around him, burying her face against his shoulder. For the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to fully break down. Sobs racked her body as years of pent-up emotions spilled out. All the guilt, the regret, the longing, all poured into that single embrace. Mark held her close, his own tears falling silently onto her hair. They stood there together, two broken pieces of a shattered whole clinging to each other for support. But just as Emily began to feel a sliver of comfort in her father's arms, something extraordinary happened. A sudden gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling leaves and sending shivers down everyone's spines. It wasn't an ordinary breeze. It felt alive, almost electric, carrying with it an energy that defied explanation. The air grew colder, and the sky darkened further, casting long shadows across the grassy hillside. People glanced up nervously, unsure whether to attribute the change to weather or something more mysterious. Then came the voice. At first it was so soft that Emily wondered if she'd imagined it. But as the sound repeated itself, clearer this time, there was no denying its presence. "Emily, I'm here." The words were unmistakable, gentle yet firm, filled with warmth and love. It was Sarah's voice, as familiar as the sound of rain tapping against a window. Every syllable resonated deep within Emily's soul, pulling her back to moments when her mother would whisper those same reassuring words after a nightmare or during times of uncertainty. For a split second, the entire cemetery fell silent. Even the birds stopped chirping as though nature itself was holding its breath. Everyone froze, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Some turned to look at Emily, wondering if she had spoken aloud without realizing it. Others scanned the area, searching for any sign of where the voice might have come from. But there was nothing. No hidden speakers, no tricks of acoustics, nothing that could explain what they had all just heard. Mark pulled away slightly, staring at his daughter, with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. She searched his face for confirmation, needing to know she wasn't losing her mind. Mark hesitated, his brow furrowing as he tried to process what had just occurred. He wanted to believe it, to think that Sarah was somehow reaching out to them from beyond. But logic fought against hope, leaving him torn between skepticism and faith. The silence broke when someone nearby gasped audibly, pointing toward the casket. All eyes followed the direction of the gesture, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The white rose Emily had placed earlier still rested atop the polished wood, untouched by the wind. Yet the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had been a somber gathering now felt charged with anticipation, as if the boundary between life and death had momentarily blurred. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, growing louder with each passing second. Did anyone else hear that? One person asked, their tone tinged with awe. Another nodded vigorously, adding, "It sounded exactly like Sarah." Speculation spread quickly, with some insisting it was a divine message while others dismissed it as a trick of the imagination. Despite the differing opinions, one thing was certain. No one present would ever forget the strange, inexplicable moment that had just unfolded. Emily, however, didn't care about explanations or debates. To her, the voice was real. It was her, Mother, speaking directly to her heart. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of the sound wash over her. In that instant, she felt a warmth envelop her, not unlike the feeling of being hugged by someone you love. It was fleeting but powerful, enough to chase away the cold emptiness that had consumed her since Sarah's passing. When she opened her eyes again, the world seemed a little brighter. The heaviness in her chest had lessened, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. She looked up at her father, who was still studying her with a mix of curiosity and doubt. "I know it was Mom," she said softly, her voice steadier than before. "She's still with us, Dad. I don't know how, but I know it." Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around at the faces of those gathered, many of whom were nodding in agreement or murmuring prayers under their breath. For the first time since Sarah's death, he allowed himself to entertain the possibility that maybe, just maybe, his wife hadn't truly left them. Maybe her spirit lingered, watching over them in ways he couldn't understand. As the ceremony continued, the mood shifted subtly. There was still sadness, of course. How could there not be? Losing someone as beloved as Sarah left an irreplaceable void. But beneath the sorrow lay a newfound sense of wonder. People began sharing stories of unexplained coincidences or comforting dreams involving Sarah, each anecdote adding fuel to the growing belief that she was still present in their lives, albeit in a different form. Emily found herself listening, intently, her heart swelling with both hope and gratitude. For the first time since her mother's accident, she felt connected, not just to Sarah but to everyone around her. The shared experience of hearing that voice created an unspoken bond among the mourners, uniting them in their grief and their faith. By the time the service concluded, the sun had begun peeking through the clouds, casting golden rays over the cemetery. It was as if the heavens themselves were offering reassurance, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, light could still find its way through. As Emily walked away from her mother's grave, hand in hand with her father, she carried with her the certainty that Sarah's love would never truly leave her. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. The days following the funeral felt like walking through a fog for Emily. Everything moved in slow motion, and yet her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't quiet. The voice she had heard at the cemetery, the unmistakable sound of her mother's words, played over and over in her head. It wasn't just the clarity of the voice that stayed with her. It was the warmth that had accompanied it, the feeling of being wrapped in an embrace only her mother could give. She tried to convince herself it hadn't been real, that grief had played tricks on her mind, but deep down she knew better. That moment had been too vivid, too personal to dismiss as imagination. At home, life felt surreal. The house, once filled with laughter and the comforting hum of Sarah's presence, now seemed eerily silent. Every room held memories. The kitchen where her mom would bake cookies while singing off-key, the living room where they'd curl up together to watch old movies, even the hallway where Sarah would call out reminders about homework or chores. These spaces, once sources of joy, now felt heavy with absence. Emily avoided certain parts of the house altogether, unable to face the reminders of what she had lost. Her father, Mark, struggled in his own way. He threw himself into work, coming home late and retreating to his study in the evenings. When he did emerge, he wore a mask of composure, trying to appear strong for Emily's sake, but she could see the cracks beneath the surface, the tired eyes, the forced smiles, the way he lingered by Sarah's favorite chair without sitting in it. They were both grieving, but their pain manifested differently, creating a distance between them that neither knew how to bridge. Emily found solace in small rituals. Each night before bed, she wrote a letter to her mom, pouring out her thoughts and feelings onto paper. Sometimes the letters were angry, full of questions about why Sarah had left them. Other times they were tender, filled with memories and promises to keep her legacy alive. Writing became a lifeline, a way to process the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She tucked the letters into a shoebox under her bed, imagining them somehow reaching her mother wherever she was. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as Emily sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor scribbling another letter, that something unusual happened. She paused mid-sentence, distracted by a faint melody drifting through the air. At first she thought it was coming from outside, a neighbor's radio or a car driving by. But as she listened more closely, she realized the music was inside the house. It was Sarah's favorite song, the one she used to play endlessly on repeat during road trips. The soft piano notes floated gently, filling the silence with a haunting familiarity. Emily froze, her pen hovering above the page. Her heart pounded as she strained to identify the source of the music. She checked her phone. It wasn't playing anything. The stereo in the living room was off, and there were no devices nearby that could explain the sound. Yet the music continued, growing louder and clearer until it seemed to surround her entirely. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Mom?" The song ended abruptly, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Emily sat motionless, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to call out to her father, to share what had just happened, but fear held her back. What if he didn't believe her? What if he dismissed it as her imagination running wild? She decided to keep it to herself, tucking the experience away like a secret treasure. Over the next few days, strange occurrences began to pile up. One morning, Emily woke up to find her favorite scarf draped over the back of her desk chair. She hadn't worn it since before her mother's accident, and she was sure she'd left it tucked away in a drawer. Another time, she walked into the kitchen to grab a snack and noticed the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. It was unmistakably Sarah's perfume, a fragrance Emily hadn't smelled since the funeral. Each incident left her equal parts comforted and unsettled, as though her mother was trying to communicate but couldn't quite break through fully. Mark noticed changes in his daughter, though he didn't understand them. She seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the weight of her grief. Her appetite returned and she started spending more time outside, taking long walks around the neighborhood. He chalked it up to the natural healing process, unaware of the series of inexplicable events shaping her newfound sense of peace. When he asked her about it, she simply shrugged and said, "I think Mom would want us to keep living." Despite her growing conviction that her mother was still with her, Emily couldn't shake the doubt nagging at the edges of her mind. Was she fooling herself? Could grief really make someone perceive things that weren't there? To test her theory, she started keeping track of the coincidences. She jotted down every odd occurrence, the music, the scarf, the perfume, and noted when and where they happened. Patterns began to emerge, reinforcing her belief that these weren't random accidents but deliberate signs from Sarah. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic with her father, Emily stumbled upon an old photo album buried beneath a stack of boxes. Dust coated its cover, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. Flipping through the photos, she found pictures of her mother as a child, laughing and posing with her own parents. Smiling at the images, Emily felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with sadness. As she turned the final page, Something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Bending down to pick it up, Emily discovered a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it carefully, she saw handwriting that made her heart skip a beat. It was her mother's, neat and precise, just as she remembered. The note read, "Always with you." Beneath the words was a tiny doodle of a heart. Emily stared at it, her hands trembling. This wasn't something she could explain away as coincidence. The note had been hidden in the album for years, long before Sarah's passing, yet it felt like a direct message meant specifically for this moment. She showed the note to her father, holding it out with trembling fingers. "Look," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is proof. Mom's still here." Mark examined the note, his expression unreadable. He traced the handwriting with his fingertip, comparing it to the countless grocery lists and birthday cards Sarah had written over the years. There was no denying it was hers. For a long moment he said nothing, his mind grappling with the implications. Finally he looked at Emily, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Maybe you're right," he admitted softly. "Maybe she is still with us." That admission marked a turning point for both of them. Up until then, Mark had resisted the idea of anything supernatural, clinging to logic as a shield against the overwhelming pain of loss. But seeing the note and witnessing the transformation in his daughter, he began to let go of his skepticism. Perhaps love truly transcended death, finding ways to remind those left behind that it never faded. As the weeks passed, Emily and Mark started talking more openly about Sarah. They shared stories, laughed at old memories, and even cried together when the ache became too much to bear. The house no longer felt so empty. Instead, it carried echoes of Sarah's spirit, woven into every corner through the moments they chose to remember her. And though the signs from beyond eventually slowed, their impact remained. Emily carried the lessons of those experiences with her, knowing that her mother's love would always guide her even in the hardest times. For the first time since the funeral, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Life without Sarah would never be easy, but it didn't have to be lonely. Her mother's presence lingered, not in grand gestures or dramatic appearances, but in the quiet, everyday reminders that love endures no matter what. The discovery of the note in the photo album marked a turning point for Emily, but it also deepened the divide between her and her father. While Emily was convinced that her mother's spirit was reaching out to her, Mark remained caught between skepticism and hope. He couldn't deny the evidence. The handwriting on the note matched Sarah's perfectly, but his logical mind struggled to accept the idea of something beyond the natural world. For him, grief had always been a private battle, one fought with stoicism and quiet endurance. The thought of surrendering to the possibility of miracles felt foreign, almost dangerous. Emily, however, couldn't ignore what she knew in her heart to be true. Every sign, from the music that filled the house to the scent of lavender, felt like a thread connecting her to her mother. These moments weren't just random coincidences. They were messages, deliberate and meaningful. She began documenting everything, creating a small journal where she recorded each occurrence alongside her feelings about it. Writing helped her make sense of the chaos inside her, giving structure to emotions that often threatened to overwhelm her. But as much as these signs brought comfort, they also came with questions. Why was Sarah choosing now to communicate? Was it because Emily needed her more than ever? Or was there something else, something deeper, that her mother wanted to convey? Late at night, when the house was silent and the weight of loneliness pressed down on her, Emily would sit by her window and stare at the stars, whispering her thoughts into the darkness. "Mom," she'd say softly, "if you're really here, I need you to tell me why." Her prayers didn't go unanswered, though not in the way she expected. One evening, as she lay in bed scrolling through old family photos on her phone, she stumbled upon a picture she hadn't seen in years. It was taken during a summer vacation when Emily was just 10 years old. In the photo, Sarah stood beside her, both of them laughing as they held up mismatched seashells they'd found on the beach. What caught Emily's attention wasn't the memory itself, but the bracelet Sarah wore on her wrist, a simple string of beads in shades of blue and green. Emily frowned, recalling how her mother had cherished that bracelet. Sarah had worn it everywhere, claiming it brought her luck. After her death, no one could find it among her belongings, and Emily assumed it had been lost. Yet, as she stared at the photo, an idea sparked in her mind. If the bracelet was missing, maybe it was hidden somewhere waiting to be discovered. Maybe finding it would bring another piece of her mother back into her life. The next morning, Emily began searching the house, starting with her mother's closet. She sifted through boxes of clothes, shoes, and accessories, carefully examining every item. Hours passed without success, and frustration began to creep in. Just as she was about to give up, she noticed a small wooden box tucked away on the top shelf. Her heart skipped a beat as she reached for it, brushing off a layer of dust. Inside, nestled among other trinkets, was the bracelet. Tears sprang to her eyes as she held it in her hands. The beads glinted faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window, their colors as vibrant as she remembered. But what truly took her breath away was the slip of paper folded neatly beneath the bracelet. Unfolding it, Emily recognized her mother's handwriting once again. This time the note read, "Keep believing, my love. Miracles happen when we least expect them." Emily sat on the floor, clutching the bracelet and the note to her chest. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this another message from Sarah? And if so, what did it mean? The phrase "miracles happen" echoed in her thoughts, stirring a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She wanted desperately to share the discovery with her father, but she hesitated. Would he dismiss it as coincidence? Or worse, accuse her of fabricating stories to cope with her grief? That evening, Emily decided to take a chance. She waited until after dinner when Mark settled into his usual spot on the couch with a book. Sitting beside him, she placed the bracelet and the note on the coffee table. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "I found something today, something Mom left behind." Mark set his book aside and picked up the items, studying them closely. His expression softened as he traced the beads of the bracelet with his fingers. "This was hers," he said quietly, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Then he unfolded the note, reading it silently before handing it back to Emily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room grew still save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Mark sighed and leaned back against the couch. "I don't know what to think, Em," he admitted. "Part of me wants to believe, but it's hard, you know?" Emily nodded, understanding the conflict in his voice. She didn't expect him to have all the answers, nor did she want him to feel pressured to agree with her. All she wanted was for him to listen, to acknowledge that her experiences were real even if he couldn't explain them. "It's okay if you don't understand," she replied gently. "But can you trust me when I say I feel Mom is still here? These signs, they're not just in my head, they're real to me." Mark looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw the sincerity in her eyes. He thought about how much stronger she seemed lately, how she smiled more often despite the pain they both carried. Could it be possible that Sarah's presence, however intangible, was helping her heal? He didn't have the answers, but he realized something important. Whether or not he believed in miracles, Emily did. And perhaps that belief was enough to guide her through the hardest days. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steady. "If you say she's still here, I'll try to keep an open mind for you." Those words meant the world to Emily. Though her father's acceptance wasn't complete, it was a step forward, a bridge between their differing perspectives. Over the following days, they started talking more openly about Sarah, sharing memories, and even speculating about the meaning behind the signs. Mark listened patiently as Emily recounted each experience, asking questions instead of dismissing them outright. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble, replaced by a shared effort to honor Sarah's memory in their own unique ways. As autumn settled over the town, painting the trees in hues of gold and crimson, Emily found herself spending more time outdoors. She took long walks through the park, the bracelet wrapped securely around her wrist. Sometimes she'd pause under a tree or near a bench, closing her eyes and imagining her mother sitting beside her. These moments of connection, fleeting as they were, brought her immense comfort. She no longer felt so alone, knowing that Sarah's love continued to surround her in ways she might never fully understand. One crisp afternoon, while walking along a familiar trail, Emily noticed something unusual. A single feather lay on the ground, its white surface pristine against the fallen leaves. She bent down to pick it up, running her fingers over its delicate edges. Feathers had always been special to Sarah, who often joked that angels must be nearby whenever she found one. Holding the feather in her hand, Emily felt a surge of warmth as if her mother were standing right beside her, smiling. She tucked the feather into her pocket and continued her walk, her steps lighter than before. By the time she returned home, she had made a decision. She retrieved the shoebox containing her letters to Sarah and added the feather to the collection. Each item inside, the scarf, the notes, the bracelet, was a testament to the bond she shared with her mother. Proof that love endured even in the face of loss. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily whispered a final prayer before sleep. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly, "for being here even when I didn't think it was possible. I'll keep believing just like you asked." Though the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, Emily faced it with renewed strength. She had learned that grief wasn't something to conquer. It was something to carry, shaped by the memories and connections that defined her. And as long as she held on to those connections, she knew her mother's love would light her path, guiding her toward healing and hope. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The sharp edges of her grief softened slightly, though the ache of losing her mother never fully disappeared. Instead, it transformed into something quieter, more manageable, a constant reminder of the love she had shared with Sarah rather than the pain of her absence. The signs that Emily believed came from her mother continued to appear sporadically, each one reinforcing her conviction that Sarah was still watching over her family. One chilly November morning, as frost clung to the grass and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke, Emily woke up feeling unusually restless. She couldn't shake the sensation that today would be different, though she couldn't pinpoint why. After getting dressed and tying the bracelet around her wrist, a ritual she now performed every day without fail, she wandered downstairs to find her father already in the kitchen. Mark was sipping coffee while flipping through the newspaper, his usual routine. But there was something different about him today, too. He seemed more relaxed, less burdened by the weight he had carried since Sarah's passing. "Morning," Emily said, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. "You look lighter." Mark glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Lighter? Is that your way of saying I've lost weight?" Emily chuckled. "No. I mean, you seem happier. Like maybe you're finally letting yourself breathe." Her words hung in the air for a moment before Mark nodded slowly. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "It's not easy, but I think talking about your mom and hearing about those signs has helped me see things differently. I don't have all the answers, but I'm starting to feel okay with that." The conversation sparked something between them, a shared understanding that neither could fully articulate. They spent the rest of breakfast discussing memories of Sarah, laughing at old stories and reminiscing about her quirks. It was the first time in months that their home felt truly alive again, filled with warmth instead of silence. Later that afternoon, Emily decided to visit the cemetery. She hadn't been back since the funeral, partly because she wasn't ready and partly because she didn't know what she'd say if she went. But today, something pulled her there. A quiet urging in the back of her mind that felt impossible to ignore. Grabbing her coat, she told her father where she was headed and set off on foot, the crisp air biting at her cheeks. When she arrived, the cemetery was eerily peaceful. Leaves crunched beneath her boots as she made her way to Sarah's grave, which stood out among the others due to the fresh flowers someone had placed there. Emily knelt down, brushing away a few stray leaves before sitting cross-legged on the ground. For a long time, she simply stared at the headstone, tracing the engraved letters of her mother's name with her eyes. "I miss you so much," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "But I'm trying, Mom. I'm trying to keep believing like you asked me to." She paused, glancing around as if expecting some kind of response. When none came, she continued. "I wish you were here to see how Dad's doing. He's getting better little by little, and me, I'm holding on even when it feels hard. I need to know you're proud of us." As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the branches overhead and sending a flurry of golden leaves swirling around her. One leaf landed gently on Sarah's headstone, its vibrant color standing out against the gray stone. Emily picked it, upturning it over in her hand. It reminded her of the feather she'd found weeks earlier, a small yet meaningful reminder that her mother's presence lingered in unexpected ways. On the walk home, Emily reflected on how far she'd come since the funeral. Back then, she had felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of sorrow with no lifeline to cling to. Now, though the pain remained, she had anchors, her memories, her father, and the signs she believed Sarah sent to guide her. Each one gave her strength, helping her navigate the difficult terrain of grief. When she returned home, Mark was waiting for her in the living room. He held a photo album in his hands, the same one Emily had discovered the note in months earlier. "I've been looking through this," he said, patting the worn cover. "There are so many pictures of your mom I haven't seen in years. I thought we could go through it together." They spent the next hour flipping through the pages, sharing stories and pointing out details they hadn't noticed before. One photo in particular caught Emily's attention. A candid shot of Sarah kneeling in the garden, dirt smudged on her hands and a wide grin on her face. Beside her sat a small potted plant, its leaves just beginning to sprout. "That's the rose bush she planted for you," Mark explained. "Do you remember?" Emily nodded, smiling despite the lump forming in her throat. "She said it would grow strong and beautiful just like me." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "I should check on it. Make sure it's still okay." The next morning, armed with gardening gloves and a pair of pruning shears, Emily ventured into the backyard. The rosebush had grown significantly since her mother's death, its branches tangled and wild. Kneeling beside it, Emily carefully trimmed away dead stems and cleared away weeds that had taken root nearby. As she worked, she noticed something strange tucked beneath the base of the plant, a small glass jar half buried in the soil. Curious, she dug it out and unscrewed the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Her heart raced as she unfolded it, recognizing Sarah's handwriting immediately. This note was shorter than the others, consisting of just 3 simple words. "You are enough." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she clutched the jar to her chest. The message resonated deeply, touching a part of her that still doubted her ability to carry on without her mother. It was as though Sarah had anticipated her struggles and left behind these words to remind her that she didn't have to be perfect. She only had to keep going. That evening, Emily showed the note to her father, who read it silently before pulling her into a tight hug. "She always knew exactly what to say," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Even now, she's taking care of you." Over the following weeks, Emily and Mark grew closer than ever. Their nightly conversations became a cherished ritual, a time to share thoughts, fears, and hopes for the future. They talked openly about Sarah, celebrating her life rather than mourning her loss. Together, they began volunteering at the local community center, organizing events and fundraisers in her honor. It was their way of keeping her spirit alive, ensuring that her kindness and generosity continued to touch lives. As winter approached, bringing snowflakes and holiday lights, Emily found herself reflecting on how much had changed. She no longer feared the idea of moving forward. Instead, she embraced it, knowing that Sarah's love would always accompany her. The signs may have slowed, but their impact remained etched in her heart, guiding her toward healing and hope. One night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Emily whispered softly, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." And for the first time in a long time, she fell asleep with a smile on her face. The arrival of spring brought a sense of renewal to the small town, as if nature itself was mirroring the healing journey Emily and Mark were on. The once barren trees began to bud with fresh green leaves, and flowers pushed their way through the thawing soil, painting the landscape in vibrant colors. For Emily, this season felt symbolic, a time to embrace growth, hope, and the promise that life could bloom again, even after loss. She woke each morning with a quiet determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. By now, the signs from Sarah had become less frequent, but no less meaningful. Each one carried a weight of its own, reinforcing the belief that her mother's love transcended the boundaries of life and death. Emily didn't question them anymore. Instead, she accepted them as gifts, gentle reminders that Sarah was still part of their world, watching over them in ways they might never fully understand. These moments gave her strength, especially during times when grief threatened to resurface. One sunny afternoon, Emily decided to revisit the rose bush in the backyard. Since discovering the note inside the glass jar months earlier, she had taken special care of it, nurturing it with water, sunlight, and love. Now, standing before it, she marveled at how much it had grown. The once small plant had transformed into a lush shrub adorned with velvety red blooms. Its beauty was breathtaking, a testament to both Sarah's foresight and Emily's dedication. Kneeling beside the bush, Emily gently touched one of the petals, feeling its softness against her fingertips. "You did good, Mom," she whispered, with a smile. "It's strong, just like you said it would be." As she spoke, a single petal detached from the stem and floated down onto her hand. She held it carefully, examining its delicate structure. It seemed almost too perfect to be real, a tiny masterpiece crafted by nature itself. Later that evening, as Emily sat at her desk writing in her journal, she pressed the petal between two sheets of paper, preserving it alongside the other mementos she had collected over the months. The shoebox beneath her bed had become a treasure trove of memories. Letters, notes, the scarf, the feather, the bracelet, and now, the rose petal. Each item told a story, weaving together a tapestry of love and connection that spanned beyond the physical realm. Mark noticed the change in his daughter, not just in her demeanor but in the way she interacted with the world around her. Gone was the girl who had withdrawn into herself after Sarah's passing. In her place stood someone stronger, more resilient, yet still deeply compassionate. Her eyes sparkled with a newfound light, a reflection of the inner peace she had worked so hard to achieve. Watching her, Mark couldn't help but feel proud and grateful. He too had undergone his own transformation. While he still struggled with moments of doubt about the supernatural elements of their experiences, he had come to accept that some things couldn't be explained. What mattered most was the comfort those signs brought to Emily, and indirectly, to him. They served as a bridge between past and present, allowing him to honor Sarah's memory while continuing to build a future for himself and his daughter. To mark the anniversary of Sarah's passing, Emily and Mark planned a day dedicated to celebrating her life rather than mourning her absence. They invited close friends and family members to join them at the park where Sarah had loved to walk. Together, they shared stories, laughter, and tears, creating a space where everyone could feel her presence without hesitation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily stood up and addressed the group. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were clear and heartfelt. "Mom used to say that love doesn't end, it just changes form," she began. "And I think she was right. Even though she's not here physically, I feel her everywhere. In the wind, in the flowers, in the little things that remind me of her every day. So today isn't about saying goodbye. It's about remembering all the ways she made our lives better." Her speech ended with applause and nods of agreement, followed by a moment of silence as everyone reflected on Sarah's legacy. Then, one by one, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying a personal message written to her. Emily watched as hers drifted upward, carrying the simple phrase, "Thank you for everything." Afterward, Emily and Mark returned home, exhausted but content. They spent the rest of the evening flipping through old photo albums, laughing at silly pictures and reminiscing about happier times. At one point, Mark paused and looked at his daughter thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "your mom always said you were destined for great things. She believed in you more than anyone else." Emily smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I hope I can make her proud," she replied. "You already have," Mark assured her. "Every day you prove just how strong and amazing you are, and I know she sees it wherever she is." That night, as Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life without Sarah would never be easy, but it didn't have to be lonely. Her mother's love continued to guide her, lighting her path even in the darkest moments. Whether through signs or memories or simply the warmth of knowing she was loved, Sarah remained a constant presence in their lives. For the first time since her passing, Emily allowed herself to dream about the future. She imagined finishing high school, going to college, traveling, and building a life filled with purpose and joy. She knew there would be challenges along the way, but she also knew she wouldn't face them alone. Her father, her friends, and most importantly, her mother's enduring spirit would always be there to support her. As sleep finally claimed her, Emily whispered one last thank you to the woman who had shaped her world in countless ways. "Good night, Mom," she murmured. "I'll see you in my dreams." Outside, the stars twinkled brightly in the vast expanse of the night sky, their light stretching endlessly across the universe. Somewhere among them, Emily believed, was her mother, watching, waiting, and loving her from afar. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its ups and downs, she walked it with confidence, guided by the unwavering certainty that love, in all its forms, lasts forever.